measurement, we're looking at two possibilities: parameters and statistics. Right now, based on the title of the course, you know that we're working with statistics fairly frequently, but parameters are really what our ultimate objective would be. All right, for probability, a parameter like mean and standard deviation was what we were going for because you had access to the entire population. But when it comes to real life data collection, generally you're not going to have access to an entire population. So what you do is you generate what we call a representative sample of that population, run some calculations on that sample, and then use probability to tie those conclusions from the sample to the population. All right. So if this sample is representative of that population, then with certain degrees of certainty, you can draw a conclusion about a population as a whole. All right. So we're using parameters to draw conclusions about statistics. All right. The types of data, as we know from the first unit, we have qualitative and quantitative data. All right. Depending on what type of data we're looking at, we might do different things. All right. So if we're dealing with qualitative data, we would be more concerned with percentages. If we're dealing with pretty much anything else, we would be dealing with averages, maybe medians. The mode is more consistent with qualitative data because that would be consistent with percents and counts. So it's important that you are able to distinguish one type of data from another. Whether or not you're always using that name, those names, quantitative, qualitative, is not really the point. It's more so that you have an intuitive understanding of which one is which. All right. Now, when it comes to quantitative data, we have two types, the discrete and continuous. In the last unit, we learned that there are some techniques that are specifically designed for continuous data sets, but can be used for discrete data sets as long as there's a correction factor involved, continuity correction. All right. So binomial situations are designed for discrete data sets, but we can apply a binomial process to a continuous data set as long as we correct for continuity. All right, and that came up on the test, and it's one of those things like you either knew it or you didn't. But yeah, that's a different conversation for a different day. That day being tomorrow. Data classification. You can classify your data in four ways. We have the nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio levels. So it's not always the case where a term will define itself, like just based on the name of the term. So some of these actually fall into that category. But nominal consists of names, labels, categories only, cannot assign numerical values. It's qualitative data. But the nom part of nominal, I took French, so nom, name, that works. I recently learned that I don't even know how to pronounce it. I just know how to spell it. Nombre in Spanish. Is it nombre?
Nombre.
Nombre. Okay, yeah. So I put a kind of a French pronunciation on a Spanish word. That means name. It does not mean number, as I thought it did. And then I would look at some handouts that my son had from his Spanish class, and I would see that on the top of it, it would say nombre with a little line after it. Be like, that can't possibly mean number. It must mean name. I'm like, that's crazy because it looks like it would mean number. That sucks. Anyway, so that blew my mind. But the NOM part of that, it's consistent with nominal. So this is one of those terms that maybe kind of helps you define it based off of the etymology of it and the breakdown of it. So ordinal, order. So that kind of fits. But the second part of it, I don't think you're necessarily getting that from the word itself. But the differences between data values either cannot be determined or are meaningless. Right? So that's just straight memorization. Because interval, same idea, but now the differences are meaningful, but you can't have zero in the set. As opposed to ratio, which is pretty much the same as interval, except zero can be in the set. All right, so now it really just becomes a matter of memorizing. All right. Now, I tried to kind of come up with my own way of remembering things, like ratio, like the word ratio is talking about, fractional relationship. And so I just kind of looked at it like, well, in order for any possible ratio to be created from a data set, then I'd have to be working with pretty much every value that exists, right, including 0. So, that's my way, but that's not necessarily the best way, I guess.
There's an O in ratio.
Oh, there you go.
I don't know.
We'll take it. Yeah, just anything, whatever helps.
There's an O in interval too.
Yeah, and nominal.
Yeah, I was waiting. I was gonna.
The only one that doesn't have it.
I wanted someone to be like, oh yeah, and I would just be like,
Well, I was kind of taking it as we're debating between interval and ratio, and like, okay, which is the one that includes the 0? There's no O in interval. There is one in ratio.
That's what. Yeah, I know. I was
That's-
just making a
yeah.
bad joke. Like if I said something, if someone would just be like, oh yeah, you're right, and it's like, no.
Oh,
there's
you
no-
just
there's
want to
no
see if you
O
can
in
get
it.
people.
Oh my God, it's snowing.
We're not
We're not
dismissal.
sheeple.
dismissal.
Thank God.
We're going home early.
Actually, it is snowing. Wait.
Yeah.
Well, like I'm not even pranking it.
No, we are careful, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go home. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty much slaves to trends of society and things like that. So
I am the society trend.
there you
I
go.
don't understand how hydro flasks are the newest trend. It doesn't make sense.
Then
to
keep
me.
your water cold.
There's so many water bottles you can get that aren't $40. No, I don't. I have a Swell and a Yeti, and both of them.
$17.99.
And I didn't pay for either of them because my
Dishwasher
dad
safe,
gets them-
baby.
I have a 32
My dad gets them
Camelback
free when he
gels.
goes to like different conferences.
below
He
the
works.
outside.
He works for an alcohol distribution.
Yeah, I know that.
We're going to classify them as nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. And some of them you can make a case for more than one possibility. So the first one is letter grades.
Nominal.
So let me write out some letter grade. Yeah, it's going to be ordinal.
You can organize them.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Okay, nominal's not.
You could say interval because the differences between grades are pretty meaningful.
Right, and so that's what I'm going to get to in a sec. So this is a typical distribution of letter grades. Let's put it between the C and the C+. All right, the issue is when you start getting into interval, you're talking about the difference between data values can be determined on the interval level and are meaningful. All right. So then the one question I would ask in order to verify that is, what is A minus C? For example, or A minus A, or A
20.
minus A minus. Yeah, 20. Like 2.0 if you're on a GPA scale. But it does
Could be F.
depend on what, yeah, it could be another letter grade. A minus C is equal to C.
Because if you take the number that you get if you got an A minus the number you get if you get a C, it'd be like,
No, but he's saying like you need to specify the numbers that are associated.
Right.
just
and
the letters by themselves, it doesn't really matter.
Right. So what we have is a lot of ambiguity. So again, it's either I can't determine the difference between values, or if I did, it wouldn't be a meaningful difference. Right? And I think that's what we're looking at here, because I don't even get past the part where I can come up with a difference between values, because it would have to be, well, if this is the case, then that's the difference. If that's the case, then that's the difference. If that's the case, then that's the difference. I'll have like 5 different scenarios. All right, so we leave it at ordinal level because we need to make more assumptions in order to progress beyond that. All right, gender, nominal. All right, consists of labels only. All right, so you could get into the different types of gender, but it is a finite quantity, and they only represent labels with no one gender having more value than another. All right, at least in an ideal world, I guess. So weight in carats of diamonds. Interval.
No zeros, huh?
You could have 0.
How can you possess a 0 carat diamond?
You don't have one.
Probably possess
You are
zero
not
diamonds.
possessing
Well,
a diamond.
valid takeaway.
But that's like, I'm not even joking. Like, why does that work? You are not possessing a diamond.
It's like
Well,
you
in that
have-
case, you're holding a 0 pound building.
Well, what's wrong with that? 0 carats equals 0 diamonds. 0 is a number.
Right, but then it's not even then you're not even weighing diamonds.
What if these-
Well, that's the thing. Matt's point is well taken, because if you have 0 carats, you might as well be holding a 0 pound building, because you could be holding 0 pounds or 0 carats of anything, right? And who's to say it's necessarily a
Well,
diamond?
that's useless information,
Yeah, this
but it's
phone
still
is 0
information
carats.
nonetheless.
Right. I mean, it's fun. Now we could say ratio, because maybe
It'd be easier to say ratio if it was just number of diamonds, but since it's weight.
rounds to 0. Like, if you're saying that we're rounding to the nearest carat, and you have, I mean, I'm not an expert on the sizes of diamonds, because I was instructed what type of engagement ring to purchase. I just showed up with the cash and I purchased it, and then I was in charge of picking an appropriate time to surprise her with it. All right, but I had no control over what the jewelry was going to consist of. So I'm just going to throw out a number. It may not make sense at all. But let's say you have 0.1 carat of a diamond, right? But your only options are to round to the nearest carat. If that's the case, then it would round to 0 carats. All right, so you can make a case for ratio as being an option here, but I would say it's more likely that it's interval. If it's a multiple choice question, then you're in dangerous territory, because the question will say which of the following is the best way to represent the data. In which case, the one that you would not have to make up too many conditions in order for it to be a true statement. All right, and so that would be the interval level. What do we say about body temperatures?
ratio.
Ratio.
Can you have a body temperature?
Didn't say it was a human's body temperature.
Didn't say it was human, and didn't say it was alive.
I feel like the idea of like specifying body temperature would make me want to say interval.
Well,
Well,
I
then
don't
you're
know.
wrong, Zach.
What if, Zach, what if, you go to the morgue and someone's at 0 degrees centigrade?
Zach, Jen.
Then I would ask why you're measuring body
It also
temperature
didn't say what-
Celsius in America.
Not why you're measuring body temperature in the morning.
I only said centigrade.
That's actually an important thing to do.
I only said centigrade because it would take less temperature.
No, I'm okay. We can stop having this now. It's okay. That's fine. We don't have to talk about that anymore.
Degrees.
So
It's fine.
interval could be interval. What are some circumstances in which it might be interval?
Human body temperature.
Living.
I mean, are there any animals who have below 0?
I don't know, so I'm gonna say it's got to be living and
They're
human.
I
cold-blooded
think some,
animals.
I think
Bats.
some
So if the temperature is
reptiles.
above below 0, then they're gonna be.
BATS.
Yeah, so it could be some other sort of organism that maybe can have a temperature equal to 0. That's equal to 0. That puts it in ratio. So living and human. What about a change in scale? Is there any temperature scale that would?
Technically, there's like so many weird.
Like Kelvin.
Yeah.
Well,
no,
you're
not
not gonna,
just
you're not
that.
gonna find a body at 0 degrees Kelvin.
Well, that's the idea.
No, but
That's
like.
absolutely.
So if we're in degrees Kelvin, then we would take 0 out of the possible values, because that's complete absence of
No,
heat.
but there's also like lots of like really, really weird temperatures. Like I'm pretty sure there actually is a temperature scale that's based off of Fahrenheit, but starts at the average human body temperature of like 98 degrees.
So that's the basis for the system. So
Yeah,
like,
there's like really weird systems. There's like, oh, there's
so
like
like negative 10 degrees would be 10 degrees below average human body temperature.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like there's so many.
Why don't we
weird-
just do that?
There's so many weird ones that we don't actually use, but are used in like different settings that you just have to know.
Yeah, we
It's
should just use that. I don't really see the point in not using that.
Yeah.
Because
Research
besides
into whether
body
it's
temperature,
outside.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have an application.
It does though. So you're like,
Cause
For everyday life, absolutely.
No, because then you're saying like outside it's me degrees. That's so hot. If it's 98 degrees, that's like you can't. That's like.
Well, how about
irrational to say zero.
well another temperature scale that might make sense would be like to define 0 as the ideal
temperature?
temperature
Like
for
60.
like t-shirt weather.
Yeah.
That'd be nice. Well, I think that was the idea with making Celsius at freezing, because then it's like it's based on like the more chemical system of water is gonna freeze there, and then you can base it off of
Right.
incremental.
Yeah.
0 is freezing and 100 is boiling, right? For Celsius, yeah. Was it 212 in Fahrenheit?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Wasn't there something where they changed one of the SI unit definitions because they didn't want to keep using the triple point of water? Or that happened this year, right?
I don't think they
Oh.
changed it. They were debating it.
They redefined how you define it,
Yeah, they didn't
like
actually
how you
change.
compare it to each other.
The definition changed, the value.
Oh, okay. All right, what do we think about social security numbers? Nominal.
Isn't it a number?
Or you can't put them in order.
Well, you could. The numbers don't have value, but you could order them.
Are they given chronologically, or are they just?
They used to be. But you could also request certain social security numbers. Like you can request certain parameters, like the first 5 digits of my social and all of my sibling socials are all the same, and that was by request. Now it wasn't a matter of that those numbers weren't requested. It was just requested that they were all in this, using the same convention. And there's a decade separation between the first and the last, right? So, I mean, that is possible. But yeah, it used to be that it started off in like low numbers, and then it got higher and higher as the years went on, but that it completely fell away from that. Yeah, technically you could put them in order, but if I identify males as 0 and females as 1, I could put those numbers in order too. Doesn't mean that there's any meaning to the order. Right? It's just a way to distinguish one from the other. Right? If we were to say that this is interval, we would be saying that if a person had, I'm sorry, not interval, ordinal, it would be the same as saying that there is some meaning assigned to the distribution of the values, the ordering of them. Like the letter grades example, yeah, I couldn't find the difference between A and C, but I still know that A is better than C, right? Just by knowledge of what letter grades represent, right? I can't say the same thing about Social Security numbers. And honestly, even going back to the letter grades, let's say, for example, I could find the difference between an A and a C. Let's say I assigned the value of 4 to A and the value of 2 to C. 4 minus 2 is 2, but that implies that 2 C's equal an A. So you go to college after the first semester, you come home, transcript comes in the mail or you access it online. Parents are like, how'd you do? And you're like, I did great. I got 2 C's. And they're like, that's not great. And you're like, yeah, but 2 C's are an A because 2 plus 2 is 4. And they're like, get out. So
Wouldn't they be more concerned with the
But
fact
if-
that you only took 2 classes?
Could you call
the
it?
fact that you withdrew from the other 5,
Could you
yeah.
call it ordinal if Social Security numbers were still very much like consecutive.
You can make a case for it because then I would say the order has meaning in that it's consistent with the passage of time. Degrees.
Degrees of equal.
Exactly. Right, so that was the point. All right. So So I'm gonna say nominal.
What?
I'm gonna say ordinal.
I think it could be any of them.
I'm gonna say interval.
Noir. It spells noir.
Yeah.
Well,
Ratio.
I guess, is this dependent on the multiple definitions of degrees?
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So we want to think about situations where degrees could be any of these, right? So nominal might be the hardest, but we could start with that.
Well, I think nominal would be just college degrees.
College degrees, sure.
Well, I mean,
Well-
one's arguably higher than another, like a master's versus bachelor.
Yes, but let's stay with.
That would be more in terms of amount of time taken to achieve those.
Or
Well, I took it as like
Different stages.
Bachelor of Science versus Bachelor of Arts.
Or you could just say the Bachelor of Science, but just whatever the different thing that you're getting the degree for. So like Bachelor of Science in like astronomy versus Bachelor of Science in engineering.
Right. Bachelor of Fine Arts, I'll throw in there. Yeah, like a bunch of different things. All right. So they're all on the same level. I mean, there's debate that goes into all that stuff too, but conceptually they're all on the same level. All right. Ordinal.
Karate belts.
Karate belts.
Those degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Third degree black belt.
But if you do a brown minus white, I don't know what you get.
You don't.
So
Well, if you get a brown versus white down, then you get someone like Hulk on the floor.
interval.
I think you could subtract people.
Interval degrees of a chicken while it's cooking.
Temperature. Yeah. Degrees.
Well, but specifically, because temperature can be zero.
Or
So.
you could see.
Degrees
Yeah, it
of
could be like
chicken
cooking.
How much, like how far you've turned around a pole?
cooking.
Unless
Yeah,
you
well
have
that
it
would
on
be
it.
ratio.
Days
because-
spent in
I
college.
guess you
for
would want to
college
measure that in
students.
radians though.
Degrees of
Yeah, because of
movement.
the distance. Like that would also be ratio because you could do zero.
Degrees of burns.
Degrees of burns.
I think that's ordinal.
Yeah, that'd be ordinal.
Aren't there like values there that go along?
Yeah, but what is
Well, you
a
can't
second degree
subtract.
burn minus a first degree burn?
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, you know.
That's like a 1.5 degree burn. Like
You just
you're
see
in the
someone
middle.
clasping
I got ratio.
All right. And degrees of movement. And this might sound kind of stupid to say.
Assume in movement.
Assume that there's movement.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so degrees of chicken cooking as opposed to degrees of chicken because that could be in the freezer, frozen chicken, in which case it could be zero. But let's see if we can come up with unique. Yeah, I mean, because we could just take our intervals and make them into ratios. But do we have anything unique?
Degrees of angles. Not degrees of zero.
Degrees of angles, okay. So I'll say angle of elevation, just to get a little bit more specific. All right, thinking in terms of like algebra, pre-calc, calculus, the term degree kind of works its way into the
That's the highest exponent that you have in a problem.
highest exponent that you have in a problem. Could be zero. The differences do have meaning, just not in terms of like 2 minus 1 equals 1, but what does that mean? It's telling us that if we multiply two first degree polynomials together, we'll get a second degree, right? So we could say degrees of polynomials. All right. Anything else?
like burn degree.
Burn degrees. Yeah. I think that pretty much covers it. Interesting. Tomorrow I'll give you the guidelines for the next project.
Already?
Oh, already, yeah. You'll have a month for that one too.
Oh,
All right,
Trying
good.
to fight
I'll
club
take
and
charge
see
for this
who
one.
So you're gonna collect data.
It's your turn.
And analyze
All
the
right, you
data.
do all the
and
work, Aiden.
draw conclusions and all that good stuff. But in order to do it, you need to know how to design a study. All right. So designing samples, we have two possibilities: anecdotal evidence and available data. One is pretty bad. The other is, it's just there. Anecdotal evidence, you throw the word haphazardly in there, you know that something is not going to be good about it. No real connection to the population. Data is not representative of the population. An example is polling your friends on their opinion of smoking on school grounds. All right? Because a person being defined as your friend does not make them representative of an entire population, because you can't define an entire population by saying, well, they're all my friend. All right, so that's not going to fly. Also, there is the possibility that when you're collecting your data, you're outside having a smoke with your friends who are also smoking, and then asking them, hey, what do you think about smoking on school grounds? Yeah, sounds great. It should be allowed, totally. Yeah, even in classes, it should be totally allowed. So a lot of things would go wrong there. A perfect example from a student perspective of anecdotal evidence is test day. You see it all the time. Everybody failed, exactly. Like the whole class failed.
It turns
Why?
out it was
Because
just
the three people that you asked had a hard time with the test, and so you just use that as a generalization for the entire population. Then, I do understand that there's a misery loves company component, but there is a somewhat of a shock factor when you find out that not only did not everybody fail, but people did fairly well, and you're like, oh crap. Couldn't it be the case that I wanted everybody to fail? Because then I wouldn't be alone in no one being the one that failed.
No, you could. What if you put it on like a sort of either a quantitative or a qualitative scale about to what degree is your misery having taken this test?
And then collect the data from everyone. You know what? I could do that on a. I think I could put a whiteboard right by the door, and the day of a test, just like a marker, and all you'd have to do is just put a check in a box. I think that would be pretty reasonable. The one drawback to that is sometimes people, your responses and we'll talk about this as we go, but responses to studies are sometimes skewed by what everybody else writes. So there's actually been a lot of studies related to that, having to do with elections. People, you vote in an election, it doesn't matter, president or otherwise, and then you vote for whoever you vote for. Then you go into class the next day, and you're talking about the election, the results of the election. All of a sudden, your vote has now become consistent with whoever won the election. All right, not you personally, but the collective you. Right? There have been studies that have determined that people will change what they say about their vote depending on who actually won the election. Which is, I think, is just kind of weird. Right? Because it's not like I won the election. I won, I did it. I'm like, no, I just voted for the guy or the lady who won. It doesn't really matter for my self-esteem.
I bet it's congruent with sports teams too.
I would imagine. Yeah. What's your favorite team? Well, the team that won the Super Bowl last year. How about that? So,
No. Who won the Super Bowl last year? Patriots? Do I root for the Patriots? No.
So you give one example.
You played yourself, Mike.
What happened to the Broncos?
They were 6-10 last year. No, I did not. I started rooting for them when I was in 4th grade, and they had Tim Tebow. Sam remembers.
Cool, sports. What about collecting data?
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
I remember you being a very
hardcore Broncos fan right around when they started to get Peyton Manning.
That's just before that I was. So
Wait,
I mean,
before you were a Bronco fan, who were you a fan of?
I am from football before that.
Okay, so there's that. That I think is kind of okay because you didn't have a team that you dumped
Yeah.
to switch over. Like if you were in the market for a team, you're not going to go into the standings and be like, all right, crappiest team, where are you? All right, Cincinnati Bengals, here we go. I'm rooting for you for the rest of my life. You know, so that I can kind of understand.
Oh, chocolate hummus.
Available data.
I can't.
This is kind of lumped in with anecdotal evidence in a sense that it kind of seems like it would be not necessarily a good thing, but oftentimes it's wonderful. So it's data produced in the past to answer someone else's question, but can also be used for your own study. It's intentionally vague, and that's because there's a lot of ways that you could have available data. It's just what it sounds like. There is data that was collected. It's available. You can use it. Now, if that data were or was collected poorly, then you shouldn't be using it. If it was collected using anecdotal evidence, then forget it, right? But if somebody conducted a study, published that study, and there's data available related to that study, and you just want to use it for something else, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you cite it, right? So collecting data, you can read the blurb, but it just boils down to the idea that whatever you collect in terms of a sample needs to be representative of the population. Right? The ideal way of collecting data to have an unbiased effect would be using what's called a simple random sample, which is putting everybody's name in a hat and then drawing out like 10 names. But the real best way to collect data would be to do it in the form of a census, which would be getting information from every single person. But in both of those cases, you're looking at something that's not overly practical, right? So if the population's large enough, then to draw even a simple random sample from the population would require you to have everybody's name from every member of the population's name in order to put it in the hat to begin with, right? So it's not feasible. So what we do is we go to other types of samples. Some are really good and others are just dreadful. Convenience sample, subjects that are readily available, right? That's not always the best way to go, but if you're in a pinch, you could do that. So, for example, anecdotal evidence is me polling my friends or me polling people that I know are biased in some capacity. But a convenience sample is, I need information from the students at John Jay, your students at John Jay. I'll just get the information from you. All right, I gotta start somewhere, so we'll just do that. So show of hands, how many people like burritos? And then I'll be like, all right, well, for my small sample, which may or may not be representative of the population, I mean, I could look at it and say, well, there's no reason to think it's not. But then, upon further investigation, I might find out that you're all outliers, right? So who knows? But it's convenient. I just need a quick estimate of a population parameter. So you're the ones in front of me, so that you're the ones that I'll use, all right? But another person might look at that and say anecdotal because you all have one thing in common. You're all very smart because you decided to take this class with me, all right? So you made that very wise decision of taking AP Stats with me. So obviously you're like genius level intellect, right? So you're not consistent necessarily with the rest of the population because they're not here. Yeah. You're all here, all right? So you can look at that and say, well, now it's anecdotal, all right? Because you all have that one common characteristic, all right? Voluntary response samples are just awful. Just awful. Any self-selected survey is just not the way to go. You just got to be careful because the self-selected part of it makes it seem like any time that you opt to participate in a survey, that it would be self-selection. That's not what that means. A voluntary response sample is when you actively look for a survey to participate in, right? As opposed to somebody sending out an email with a survey in it and asking me to complete it at which point I could decide whether or not I want to complete that survey. That's not voluntary response, all right? That still may not be a representative sample, but at least it's not in the category of being the absolute worst case scenario, all right? This one, if you go home, you go online, you could find many, many instances of voluntary response samples. So what I want you to do for tomorrow is just go on the web and find a voluntary response sample and take a screenshot of it, all right? And send it to me on Remind, all right? So screenshot of a voluntary response sample. It could be from a political website. It could be from a sport website. Anything you can think of. Get creative, medical, and send that to me on Remind.
Can you send a reminder out?
I will be sending it out momentarily. Okay. All right, and I'm gonna give you a 5-point quiz grade just for doing that.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Because we needed it.
Yeah.
You were reading us, we're like, oh, what can I give them to help them?
Everyone
Test
comes
scores are actually pretty good.
I will possibly beat it.
It's easier at the start of the year, so this is the time to come.
That more refreshment.
Oh, and you get bonus. If you go to math team, you get bonus. If you get for every question you get right, you get a bonus point.
Matt, do you know what snacks are coming today?
No, I'm kind of in charge of disseminating information.
But usually it's like two.
Well, Peter. I suppose I could